If you could tell from my recent posts, I'm a very, very, very big fan of Star Wars. I love Star Wars. I've been a Star Wars fan since I was like a young boy. Like, I've been a Star Wars fan for a long time. And one thing I do want to break down is just using different aspects of different fictional franchises to give verbiage to a lot of the different concepts that I talk about. Now, if we're looking at the Sith versus the Jedi, what we need to look back at is the Jedi, right? Which came before the Sith and the Jedi. And oftentimes there's this great schism that took place in Star Wars. I think one thing that we need to understand is that both the dark side of the Force and the light side of the Force are things that permeate, that permeate, right, the world at large. They permeate the universe, the galaxy. And that they're both things that are going to be there regardless. Now, when I break down the different concepts of masculine dominance, feminine dominance, masculine submissiveness, and feminine submissiveness, one thing to understand is this: the Jedi, not the Jedi, but the Jedi, they tend to represent masculine submissiveness. Now, someone could be within the Jedi and still represent feminine submissiveness, but someone feminine submissive towards the Jedi or feminine submissive towards the Force would tend to stray on the side of things that would go contrary to the Jedi Order. So that would be like Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon Jinn was masculine dominant because he was feminine and submissive towards the light side of the Force. But oftentimes people would take a perspective of being too rigid, being too based on tradition, and that would put them in a place where the only people who could adequately go through that route of being a Jedi or being a Force wielder would be somebody who was not overstimulated with attachments, right? Now, how this concept works is similar to the traditional dating model, right? Where it wouldn't be based on necessarily how attracted you were to an individual. It wouldn't be based on your sexual compatibility and your sexual chemistry. It would be more so predicated on what was the logical decision to make so that you could be transactional with an individual, right? So that'd be like a man and a woman. They would maybe wait for marriage to have sex, and they would build an emotional connection with one another. And then when they got there, then they would start having sex, and that's how it would work. But then if somebody was too heavily overstimulated with emotion, like Anakin Skywalker, then the attachments that you had growing up would make it so that you knew that those attachments were inherently wrong. But when someone vilifies those attachments, when someone vilifies those emotions and invalidates those emotions, when you're already in a position where you felt it and you know that it's good in some way, then that masculine submissive route will cause a person to become duplicitous. This relates to a lot of different areas in life. It can work like school. If you're in school, but you have a passion and your schoolwork has nothing to do with your passion, and you lack the discipline to force yourself to do it anyways, and then your passion will become something that makes you feel like you're prostituting yourself by taking that role of being in school. But if you're not overstimulated with emotion or overstimulated with the desire for power, then when you're in school, then you can just go through that work as long as you can. And then when you get done with it, cool, you did what you had to do. Masculine submissive is about being transactional and cooperative. Now, oftentimes the Sith were predicated on being feminine dominant. It was all about emotions, letting your emotions and your craving for power be the most important thing to you. The most important thing was you're being emotional, being driven by your hate, being driven by your passion, being driven by your selfishness, being driven by your desire and your pursuit of power. So oftentimes an individual would be in a position where they had attachments, they developed those attachments, and then when they developed those attachments would be shunned by the Jedi. So they would eventually realize, hey, this is not right because I feel this love, I feel these different things. So then they would go and be a member of the Sith, or they would go and become a member of the Sith Order. Now, I think something important to understand is that oftentimes in this world, they're talking about good and evil. Things are often based on a false dichotomy that pushes people in one direction or another, like a Madonna whore complex, a gentleman gigolo complex. So let's say there's the dark side of the Force. There were different things that came up that at times they were necessary and they helped people survive. Oftentimes when you're masculine submissive and you're doing things in a traditional way, you put yourself in a stance, in a position where there are certain tools and strategies that you can use to find success that you're not allowed to use. So like a force choke, that would be seen as something that's bad, right? Force lightning, that would be seen as something that was evil, because they would feel like the emotion that you would have to experience in order to channel this type of power would be something that would cause you to lean towards the dark side of the force. But the Jedi, or I'm not the Jedi, I got to find a way of explaining that or expressing that in a way that doesn't sound like I'm saying the same word. But the Jedi that came up before the Sith were people who emphasize having balance within yourself, of understanding that you had emotions, understanding that the dark side of the force was something that permeated throughout the galaxy, and also understanding that, separating the two wasn't the smartest decision to make, right? So that causes a false dichotomy within people who haven't taken a certain stance. Like, regardless of what you do, you're going to have to repress something, right? And really, for both the Jedi and the Sith, you're going to have to repress your love, right? Love is going to be something that's repressed in whichever way you go in. So there's different things that will be considered dark side tendencies that I would consider like dark psychology when it comes to dating and relationships. There's certain things that, according to this day and age, will be seen as bad, that are probably more so necessary now more than ever because of the overstimulation. So I talk about, as a man, if you're in a relationship, you don't need to be in a relationship unless you have toxic dick. Most women these days have already developed a certain level of attachment to sexuality. They've already experienced a certain level of emotional overstimulation, to where the idea of waiting for marriage is not something that they're going to do. And if they tell that to you, chances are it's because they're not that attracted to you and they don't respect you as a man and want to follow your leadership or your guidance. So they're just following tradition. But there's no guarantee that they're going to follow tradition with everyone. So you have to have certain rules and boundaries about how you go about things when you're using dark psychology, right? I talk about different concepts that wouldn't always fit in the grand scheme of people's ideology. Like, I would consider myself the toxic masculinity coach, like in my bigger fish theory, right? Like, a lot of men, they make a mistake. Like, if they deal with a woman who's been through an abusive relationship, they'll try to be overly emotionally empathetic, sympathetic, and understanding in a way to where a woman's cup is low. They try to fill her cup, but after they fill her cup from her low place, then they expect her to want to be feminine and submissive with them, when now she's in a better place. Now, since you wanted her in a place where she didn't even want herself, her logic, her emotions may say, well, I should want to be with him because of how much he's been there for me. But often it doesn't work like that. You have to be able to take those negative experiences that she's had and reinterpret, get her a chance to re-experience those stimuli in a way that causes her to desire those things with you, right? If she's trauma bonding, a regular bond is not going to override a trauma bond. I want people to understand that. Like, a regular, friendly, emotional connection is not going to override a trauma bond in a woman's mind and in her body sexually. If people don't understand that, then they'll keep going through these cycles, right? Where a woman may often be like Darth Revan, or a man may be like Darth Revan, where, okay, now I'm trying to do things on the light side. I'm trying to be a Jedi, but then other times I'm trying to be a Sith. And that Sith is kind of like that toxic side, right? Because I want to be feminine dominant right now. I want to be emotional, but I want power. Emotion is something that lubricates for femininity, right? But emotion, it corrupts dominance, right? That, like, within a singular person, masculinity, that logic, that is something that weakens your ability to be submissive, right? But it concentrates your ability to be dominant. We need to get to a place of alignment within ourselves. The masculinity of the Jedi would be something that would be greatly suited towards the Sith. The emotion of the Sith would be something that would greatly benefit the Jedi. But because they're so fixated on using one side of psychology, because they were so fixated on using one side of things to avoid the other. They got to a place where it would create this false dichotomy to where someone could rarely reach the highest peaks of power. They could, but it would be difficult. It would be difficult. You would be limited in your ability to use the light side of the force if your perspective is you're trying to avoid emotion, right? And I know they say, well, you know, it's peace, it's still, it's calm. Yes, you can max that out. Like Yoda was one of the strongest force users in existence, but he maxed it out. He had a lot of power in it. Just like some people, if you're not in a very overstimulating environment, you can walk the path of the light side of the force. You can walk the path of the Jedi and be in church, you know, and do your thing in church. And because you're not overstimulated with emotion and the idea of power outside of that, you can take your time, and within that you can develop power within that. But oftentimes in this day and age, there's not a lot of power associated with it. So people will go through that place. They'll go through those stages of going through just regular church, right? All the time. No power is coming out of it. Nothing's coming out of it except for maybe just the emotion that they're getting out of it, being transactional, you know, not truly being feminine and submissive with God. And if they ever see that power can take place, they have to vilify sexual desire. They have to vilify sexual power, right? In order to maintain the stance that they have, because they know that if they walk that path, then they'll feel like they're straying towards the Sith. They'll feel like they're straying towards the dark side. But what happens is this: when you tell people that emotion is bad, when you tell people that sex is bad, sex is something that's a regular part of life. Emotion is a regular part of life. When you understand that, you get to a place where you realize, you know what? If you tell somebody who's experienced any type of power that there's no power to be found in what they're doing, then you know what's going to happen next? You know, this is what you do, right? You know what happens next? A person who's not experiencing power, who's seen power before, they will start straying towards getting into witchcraft. They'll start straying into accepting any spirit comes along, because no spirit involved is doing anything for them. So I'm really just talking about how that sexuality part, oftentimes you have to accept and embrace and say, you know what, there may be different things that come along with this. And when you accept that there may be different things that come along with it, you say, okay, cool, well, you do what you got to do. You embrace that sexuality. You get out of your sexual repression, and you become a full person. But before you become a full person or an integrated relationship, you have to reach polarity before you integrate. If you don't reach polarity before you integrate, then you're going to be prematurely integrated. And your relationship is either going to be powerless, right? Either your relationship is going to be powerless, or your relationship is going to be in a position where it's going to get abusive. Either powerless or abusive. That's typically how it goes. It's like that good girl, bad girl dichotomy. That good girl, good guy, you know, nice guy, bad boy mentality. These are all different things that go along. And when you understand this, you get to a place where you say, okay, I need to be either feminine, submissive, or masculine, dominant, man or woman. Now, a man has a higher capacity and a higher propensity to be masculine and dominant, just because of his frame, the way he's built, his testosterone, his bone structure, the fact that he has a penis. He has a little bit of a higher capacity to be masculine and dominant, right? But a woman, because she has a vagina, she has a higher capacity to be feminine and submissive. Why? Because that estrogen, it gives her more emotion. That influx of hormones within her body, they cause her to be emotional on a regular basis, right? And because the influx of emotion gives her the ability to be more emotional on a consistent basis, then it often is going to be a higher propensity for her to have the ability to be feminine and submissive than a man. Just like a man can be feminine and submissive and get penetrated, and he can even have orgasms from being penetrated, right? But all he has is the prostate. A woman has the G spot, A spot, O spot, cervix, all that shit, right? Likewise, if a woman wants to be dominant, she's either going to have to use a fake penis or use some other means, right? So in a man, you have a real penis. You have a real penis that gets hard. You can penetrate something. You can penetrate a woman. And when you penetrate her, then there's pleasure that can be experienced within that polarity. Now, somebody strays so far on the sides of having inclinations towards homosexuality, that's the route they want to go, they can go that route. And it's better to go that route than to try to force yourself not to be that way. But follow things to their furthest logical conclusion. And when you follow things towards their furthest logical conclusion, then you'll realize some things. Sometimes you have to take things to the next level. Sometimes you have to take it there. But when you take it there, there's some things that you learn along the way. And it's important to also avoid overstimulation when it comes to things that you desire to do, right? If you desire to be in a monogamous long-term relationship, then there are certain things that it benefits not to do, right? Like whether you're a man or a woman, right? Whether you're a man or a woman, you can get overstimulated with penis power from an individual who is not going to be any good for you, right? If you're a man, you desire to be in a monogamous long-term relationship with a woman, if that's your desire, then oftentimes it doesn't benefit you to go getting penetrated by other men, because a lot of women, they're not going to want you because of that. You can find a woman who does, but your options are going to be narrowed down, right? And for a woman, it's the same thing, dealing with a lot of men. And I don't believe it's the number of men, the quantity, but it's the quality. And you can get overstimulated with pleasure and dominance to the point where a man who would really be on your level is going to be one who you're not going to be able to be sexually compatible with up until the standard that you would have been. So when you understand this different type of these different aspects of dom-sub dynamics, it's not about who's having the sex, it's who you're having sex with. So I'm really explaining the socio-sexual dynamics from a platform of Star Wars and the Force, because when we understand this, there's different things that come with it. So this is just Brodie, I'm out.